She was only 2 years old. The state removed her to protect her. But behind closed doors, something went terribly wrong. Warnings were ignored, reports were dismissed, and by the time the truth came out, it was already too late. This is the case they failed to stop. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the beginning. In 2018, a little girl named Layla Daniels was just 2 years old. Those who met her described her as quiet, withdrawn, and unusually alert for her age. She rarely cried loudly, almost as if she had already learned that making noise could be dangerous. She was a child who seemed to be holding her breath, waiting for the world around her to be safe. But safety was a luxury she would never truly know. This story isn't just about what happened inside one home. It's about a system designed to protect children and how, in this case, it crumbled. Layla's life started with instability, and the very people meant to save her ended up placing her on a path that led to her death. It's a chilling reminder that good intentions are not enough, and that for some children, the system becomes another danger they must survive. Child Protective Services had received concerns about Layla's biological home. There were reports of instability, neglect risks, and a lack of long-term safety. While there was no clear evidence of the kind of fatal abuse that would later define her case, the red flags were significant enough. The decision was made. The child must be removed for her own protection. It was a standard procedure, a choice made countless times a day across the country. From that moment on, the state became legally and morally responsible for Layla's life. She was now a ward of the system, a system that promised her a future, a promise that would be tragically broken. She was placed with a licensed foster couple. On paper, they were perfect. They had no serious criminal history, their home had passed all the required inspections, and they were officially cleared by the system to care for vulnerable children. From the outside, it was a picture of normalcy, a standard house in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood. There was nothing that would make you look twice, nothing that raised any alarms. It was exactly the kind of stable environment the state wanted for Layla. But what happens behind the closed doors of an ordinary house is often anything but ordinary. Inside that home, Layla began to change, and the subtle signs of her silent suffering began to emerge. It wasn't long before care workers and others involved in her case started noticing things. There were unexplained bruises, a deep-seated fear of physical contact, and a sudden, heartbreaking behavioral regression. The little girl, who was already quiet, became even more withdrawn. She started avoiding eye contact, flinching at raised voices, and freezing completely whenever an adult approached her. These weren't the actions of a child who was settling into a new, loving home. These were the hallmarks of fear. Reports were filed, noting these concerns. But each time, the conclusion was the same: insufficient evidence for intervention. The system documented the smoke, but refused to acknowledge the fire. So, how did the system fail so catastrophically? It wasn't one person or one mistake. It was a chain reaction of inaction. Multiple people saw the signs, from care workers to supervisors, but no one connected the dots decisively. Social workers assumed their colleagues were handling the follow-ups. The foster placement, despite the mounting concerns, was allowed to continue without interruption. No emergency removal was ever ordered. The system did what it often does best. It delayed, it deflected, and it passed responsibility from one desk to another. And lost in the middle of all the paperwork and protocol was a 2-year-old girl with no voice to scream for help. She was a case file, a number, and her silent pleas went unheard. Then came the final day. One morning, emergency services received a frantic call from the foster home. The foster parents claimed it was all a terrible accident, but their story quickly began to fall apart. It changed with each telling. The timelines didn't match up, and the details were full of contradictions. By the time Layla arrived at the hospital, it was too late. She was pronounced dead. The quiet, withdrawn little girl who had spent her short life in fear had finally found silence. The accident was no accident at all, and the truth was about to come out in the harshest light possible. During the trial, the full, horrifying picture was revealed. Investigators presented the earlier reports that had been ignored, detailing the bruises and behavioral changes. They showed medical evidence of injuries that were completely inconsistent with the foster parents' explanations. It wasn't a single incident. It was a clear and undeniable pattern of ongoing harm. The prosecutor stood before the court and stated a truth that everyone in the system should have seen months earlier. This was not a single moment of failure. It was a chain of ignored warnings. The foster parents were ultimately convicted for their horrific actions, but even with a guilty verdict, one haunting question remained unanswered. Why didn't the system stop this sooner? In the aftermath of Layla's death, the expected response occurred. Internal reviews were launched, procedures were questioned, and promises were made to ensure this would never happen again. New protocols were discussed, and blame was assigned and deflected. But no amount of reform or review could undo what had already been done. Layla Daniels became what so many children failed by the system become: a case file, a statistic, a name in a tragic report used to justify policy changes that came far too late. Her story became a cautionary tale, a lesson learned at the cost of a life. Layla Daniels wasn't failed by one person. She was failed by a system that was designed to be her protector. A system that saw the warnings but chose not to act. The real question isn't just what happened to her, but how many other children are still out there, in similar situations, waiting for someone to listen before it's too late. We have to question the system, and we have to do more to protect the children it's meant to serve. Thank you for watching. If you found this story thought-provoking, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more content that encourages reflection.